Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for coming here. We have the awful task of having to present after Joe Sanfilippo and right before lunch. So, yay us, and yay 11:15 session time. My name is Gina Rogers. I am a digital learning consultant at Grantwood AEA, and so we are out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so the schools that we serve around there are Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, surrounding area, corridor area. And I'll let Jonathan introduce himself.
Hey everybody, I'm Jonathan Rogers. I'm a journalism teacher at City High, and I mentioned it over here a little bit ago. About 5 years ago, I was Iowa High School Press Association and some media outlets when all the fake news and everything else started happening. They're like, oh, what are you guys doing about media literacy? And I was kind of like, oh, I'll get back to you on that, because I hadn't actually taught a lot of media literacy, and it's been a fun kind of journey over the last 5 years exploring this. And my wife has been great to add into this. I've done this presentation at South by Southwest and NCT and a few other places, and it's been really great. I've kind of been in my journalism world bubble, and Gina does a great job in this of bringing it. Hopefully, I know a lot of you guys are elementary school teachers and all sorts of stuff, so I think we have a lot of good stuff that can be used in like any class, not just the journalism world.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Just with a conversation about media literacy, and everyone wants you to teach media literacy, and the good news here is that there's lots and lots of free resources, and we're going to reference back to those free resources throughout the presentation today. We'll talk about some of our favorites. There's lots and lots of links on the presentation, and so I would invite you to make sure that you can get into the presentation and follow along, because there are a couple different activities and things we're going to do together. Was everyone able to get in, and do you need me to put the URL back up? Yep, no problem. I know. I'm always the last person to follow directions, and always talking to my neighbor and doing everything that I shouldn't be doing. And then I'm like, oh shoot, they're 6 slides in. I need to.
Yeah, and on this, all this legislation and politicians are coming out saying that you guys should teach this stuff, but then none of them are saying how you should teach it. So I think one of the main missions of this, is on some Common Core committees and other things in the past 5 years, and the big thing is a lot of it, they don't give you a lot of best practices or things that could work or anything like that. They're just saying go do it with another unfunded mandate. And hopefully this will give you guys some really practical good things. Not just a politician out there saying, hey, let's go teach media literacy K through 12, and then not having any actual lessons or anything of how to actually do that.
All right, are we good? Yeah? Awesome. Okay, so going back to the free resources, we'll be referencing back to those, and I'll also invite you to just participate in some different activities along the way as we're working today. And so just keep that in mind. You can add this slide deck, of course, to your Google Drive, and feel free to reference back to it at any point. So if there's anything that you want to pull off of this and use with your kiddos, feel free to do that. That's why we've created this. And so we've kind of divvied this presentation up into 3 parts. Part 1, what is fake or misinformation online, and how do you spot it, and how can you kind of try to sniff it out a little bit. And so we've compiled a few different resources or things that we always go to or reference back to with regards to fake news. Jonathan, if you want to talk a little about some of these.
So one of the things when I first started teaching this, a lot of students would come to me and be like, is the New York Times fake, Mr. Rogers? Is CNN fake? And I'm like, hey guys, journalists make mistakes for sure, but if you want to check out if something's real, Snopes, Washington Post Fact Checker, PolitiFact, Google News, Real Clear Politics are where to go. They're great resources that are usually where they can go to find out if something is accurate or biased or anything like that. I think it's so important in the world that we have, the answers when students come to us if they're questioning what's going on. my main thing, and I know a lot of you may be worried about teaching media literacy, I've never really had a problem doing it. One of the things I open up with is I'm not going to tell you where to get your news, I just want you to know where your news comes from. So I think that, like, you can read as much conservative stuff or liberal stuff or whatever you want, so that way it's a good basis of coming at this, of knowing, like, hey, are you part of some liberal agenda or part of some conservative conspiracy of, like, no, I'm part of the teaching agenda of teaching you how to critically look at anything you're getting online. And that's kind of diffuses a lot of the tension sometimes. Uh-oh.
Okay.
One thing that came up too recently as she's getting that going, they have full-time people in the journalism world, the media world now, that are misinformation specialists. A lot of, we were talking about how just in the past year, a lot of these resources have come out and new jobs are appearing in our world, and one of them is a misinformation specialist, which is pretty crazy that people are going out just looking at the misinformation being spread and why it's being spread. In India, every political campaign, there were 30 groups of associated or not affiliated groups with every political campaign that were in charge of spreading misinformation on Facebook. So there's definitely groups and everything out there putting out purposeful misinformation, and also people like teachers and media people that are trying to sort this out and figure out what's real and what's not real and why they're putting out different groups of information.
Okay, so my computer just decided
To die.
just stop. I don't know why, because I'm at a tech conference and that's how this stuff works. Here, shut down because there's a problem. Thank you for telling me that. Okay, so almost back.
You want me to get mine up? There you go. So just while we're getting this up, what do you guys teach? Anybody want to volunteer so we can kind of talk about that? I know we got some elementary teachers and some computer guys. What do you guys
High
teach?
school government.
High school government, social studies, that's great.
Library.
Library,
English.
English, good. Have you guys tried any media literacy units or done some stuff in the past? It's good.
I work it into my, when we do political campaigns and media strategies, I work it into that.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of the teachers at my school district, they've just found little mini lessons that they can add in. A lot of them don't really want to do a whole unit or anything like that, and that's great. I think you can use a lot of this stuff, hopefully, add it into your existing things. I definitely don't think you need to recreate the wheel in anything that you're doing. And I think that that's really, hopefully, the initiative that a lot of this is doing, is just getting you guys to add in some media literacy into some of those existing topics that you guys have. My one go-to, as she's getting this up, which is one of the first slides, is the Newseum Shareworthy worksheet. I think that works really well with a lot of social studies units and a lot of other things like that, which we'll talk about here in a second. All right, are you voting?
Sorry about that. Okay, so it's always helpful for me to have a mental model when thinking a little bit about any topic. And so when I think about fake news or mis or disinformation, this graphic or this mental model really helped me categorize and think about the different things that we encounter online and how they are different and how they're similar. And so it stretches from the most innocuous, and so the things that are probably the least harmful and designed intentionally to entertain audiences, to things that are very much designed to mislead and to create some sort of harmful or have some sort of harmful consequence. And so on our far left side, we see satire and parody. That looks kind of like things like this from Andy Borowitz, which he's got a satire column. If you know what you're encountering, you find it funny. The problem is sometimes, I know I had a lot of kiddos in my classroom when I taught high school that didn't understand what satire was, they come across something like this in like their social media news feed. They didn't know what the context was, they didn't know who the author was, they didn't really understand what satire was very well, and so they took it very seriously when they saw it. So those were some good teaching conversations that we had. Moving on to false connections, false context, misleading content, that area.
Click for you.
Thank you. That's where we see something like this. And so this is a photograph that was posted online onto someone's Twitter feed here. It says this is what happens when government believes people are illegal. Now, the issue with this particular photo is that it is a photo that was taken from a staged protest that was I don't even know if it was outside of a detention facility, but it leads us to believe that this is something that is happening currently. And so that's just one thing that we need to think about with our learners is how do we dig deeper into all of that visual content that we're being presented with to make sure that it is in fact accurate visual content. Moving on towards that imposter content, false context, manipulated content, that's where we're starting to get more into the intentionality, the intentional act of trying to deceive a readership. And so if we move on to this next image, I remember very clearly the day that I woke up and I looked on Facebook and I saw this and I thought to myself, it's like, that doesn't look quite right. And so did anyone else have this experience or see this rolling around their news feed, these things rolling around their news feed in around 2016, 2017? All right, I see you nodding your head. What did you notice about this, or what were you seeing?
Well, I saw it, and then I first impression looked like yours, it can't be right, and I noticed the ABC News logo looked a little different than normal, so I kind of went down that path then to find out that it wasn't
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so there were a bunch of these fake news sites that were rolling around, and they have since disbanded quite a few of them. But the first thing that you look at was that URL, and so the URL for ABC News is abcnews.com. And this was abcnews.com.co or something like that. So it had an imposter URL, and also like just the logo was a little bit off. And that's the thing, we have to really teach our learners to be detectives, to be looking very carefully at what they're seeing in front of them. So next, moving on to those that are intentionally designed and developed to deceive. We've seen this image before, right? So manipulated content and how easy it is now with Photoshop, some not very expensive software, to take this image that was here on the right, which is our true image, and change it into this manipulated image, which shows Emma Gonzalez ripping up the Constitution. So,
You want me to go back here?
go ahead and
Okay.
let's go into the video.
Okay, another easy takeaway that you guys can do that I use in my, or we use in our freshman English classes is this video. It's just 5 easy ways to spot the fake news and get them to start thinking critically about their news feeds and what's coming up in front of them. So if you want to play the video.
Here are 5 ways to spot fake news. Number 1, look for unusual URLs. If they end with .lo or .com.co, chances are they aren't legitimate news sites. Number 2, dissect.
So my favorite fake news URL was called thereallyrealnews.com. It did exist for a while, and I'd pull it up, but they've taken it down, which, I mean, thereallyrealnews.com was totally fake news. And I think one of the things, as a First Amendment person, we'd always kind of thought in democracy, we're like, hey, people are smart enough to figure this stuff out. We got to let it happen, and we'll sort it out. And I think what we're seeing now from Facebook and Google and everything else, they're just too savvy at trying to trick people that we need Facebook and Google and other people to start taking these sites down. So I think that's one big change that's happened in the last couple of years.
The layout. Look for grammatical errors. incorrect dates, bolds claims with no sources, and sensationalist images. These are all red flags. Number 3, dig deeper. Find out who wrote the article and who supports the site. If this information doesn't exist, or you need to register to get it, then question why. Number 4, cross-check. Use fact-checking sites to confirm information and see whether other credible news outlets are reporting similar news. Number 5, try a reverse image search. If the same picture appears in unrelated stories, you may have a reason to be suspicious. For more media literacy tips, visit us at commonsense.org.
And one thing I'd say on that too is really tell your students, like, Google News is actually pretty good. Like, when you're searching around for different articles and finding various sources, Google News has really spent millions and millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on, they have a fact checking on the side of it. But if they go to Google and search for a news topic, it's still a pretty bad dumpster fire. So there's a big difference when searching on Google versus searching on Google News to try and find various sources. And I'll talk a little bit more later about how to get online news feeds.
Okay, so these are just a couple different infographics. In the notes on the slideshow, they are linked back to where they came from. So just different things to put in front of your kids as you're talking with them about how to critically evaluate whatever it is that they're coming in contact with or whatever sources they're taking a look at. Do you want to talk about the Snopes?
Yeah, one of the things that I love throwing up is the Snopes Top 50, not the top 10 weird, fake, or true things that are weird and on the internet. When I teach my media literacy unit in Foundations Journalism and now in English 9 again, we pull up the Snopes Top 50 as a nice bell ringer to start off class, and there's usually some pretty funny content on there. We can click on it and check it and see what's on the Hot 50 for today. Maybe. But it's a good thing to go back when a lot of these things are trending on their social media feeds. So the number one thing at the top is what?
Not super.
Is testicular blows. Let's do the Chick-fil-A and same-sex marriage. So let's click on it. So one thing, Google has given Snopes like $100 million to pay fact checkers to research and come up with these. I know there has been some like political backlash, whether they're biased or not. That's always going to be attacks in the political world, but I think they're pretty good. And if you scroll down, it'll tell you if it's true or false, and then they do a big like fact-checking explanation of how they came to their decision on whether it was true or false and what sources they came to. And just explaining to students, I didn't know what fact-checking even meant until I was in college, so explaining like, hey, this is an example of what a fact-checker does, this is how they went through and looked at the various history and sources to determine whether this was true or false.
All right, so we are going to do some practicing of snipping out some suspicious news here. And I always love my little headshot snipping. Okay, so our image, we took a look at this before and we had determined that it was fake. Now what's a way that we can, if we come across an image and we're not so sure about it, what are some tactics that we can use to try to determine whether or not that image is legit?
Reverse.
Yeah, reverse Google image search, right-click, image search. And so with this image, if you just right-click on it, image search, you'll be able to go back and find that. Now we have another image. This is a more current image that was floating around, I'd say in the past like 3 weeks, especially with Greta coming here to the United States. It's our Greta with George Soros, who is a billionaire leftist agenda philanthropist. And from Secret News, it was a website in France, I'll just tell you that. They published this image. And so use your right click on this image and do an image search for it. So right click, image search, and see what you can find out about it.
Yeah, you have to go to the I can't do right click on your thing.
Oh, you can't, but you went into
You have to
the,
go to the URL
Yeah.
Okay,
where
click
that
on it.
image is.
so if you click on my image, it will take you out to the original news source. And the image is right there. Right click on it,
Gotcha.
search Google for images. And so then you're going to see just a whole lot of information about this image and where it's appeared. And so this is a great trick to teach all of our learners, especially even our young learners, as they're being bombarded with images over and over and over again, just knowing where is that image coming from? Where else is it showing up? And so what have we learned about this image?
It's mostly false.
Mostly false, yes, according to Snopes. Did anyone find an original image or what this image originally was?
Was the Vice President Al Gore, former Vice President.
Yeah, former Vice President Al Gore. So they just took his head off and replaced it with George Soros. And so very easy to do with some Photoshop to make these things appear to be real. All right, we've got some more images here. Practice with these. If you click on them, they'll take you out to the original image on Twitter. The one on the left-hand side, I felt was like safe for work, and so it leads out to the actual Twitter feed. The one on the left hand, the one on the right hand side, that stream got pretty language heavy pretty fast, and so it is linked in the notes of this presentation if you are curious or you want to know. But it does take you back to the image where if you click on that, you should be able to right click and find out more information about that.
Is there a Mac equivalent for the right click?
Keep 2 fingers on tap.
Or control.
Yeah, or control. So you can hit the,
Yeah, but I'm not getting them.
right, so you're just gonna have to.
And sometimes where your where your stuff is set up is different. And so,
She just needs to open it in Google. All right, truth seekers, what's the truth behind the Tupac
oh, it looks
still alive
we're
with Donald
looking at
Trump
right
image?
now. And so, yeah, maybe try that.
Put me up to something about Camilla.
Did you find any truth behind the images?
Also, like, if I'm here, which
Kamala.
one would I?
Try just clicking on that. See what happens. And then can you right click one more?
Like this one?
Yeah, sure. Does it
Search.
reverse image search?
This one?
Yeah.
So I get this thing.
That's weird that it doesn't pop up with that one. Hey Gina,
Huh.
you know how to get to the reverse image search? It's not like popping up on our computer.
If you do the link on that slide, down in the notes.
I did that.
It'll pop
So
up.
I'm here, and I went
Well,
to
that, you have to
this.
go to the real image. You can't, well, you
Right.
can do a static one,
And
but you
then
gotta
I
drag
right
it.
click, and I do search Google.
Yep.
And then it just pulls up, I get the same list of
Okay.
articles.
Yeah. So it looks like, I wonder, it must be the most
do all?
recent, yeah, let's try. Well, that's Kamala. I wonder
It's weird
if they
it's
must
pulling
have-
up Kamala instead of.
Yeah. Which they might have just recently reused this image for, if we take out
Kamala?
Kamala and do Tupac Trump. And then
Then right click
we
again.
can,
Or,
well, yeah, or even if you get
Just
into
click
that
on
article in there, like, and you can check.
gotcha.
Yeah. All right. So I'm not sure if there was just very recently a resurrection of that image with Kamala Harris or something that it's like muddying up my
There was.
activity.
It came out because I use that same image when I do my fake news unit or whatever. And I had started to use that and I ran into the same issue that was
Yeah.
with
When
that.
did you use it? Recently? Because I updated last week.
Within the last month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
But there was conservative news sites that were using it saying that like Kamala Harris was being racist or not being racist depending on which site you looked at.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, and that's a good thing to have a conversation with kiddos about is just like how do you continue to dig into the search results and continue to unearth what's going on. Okay, so real versus fake news headlines. And so we've got several headlines up here. What we would like you to do is if you go to Snopes or any of these other fact-checking sites, I would say Snopes is the one that I use the most frequently. Just see what you can find out about these different headlines. First one, Islamists in Pittsburgh pocket cash raised for Jewish community in wake of mass shooting. So that's from last year, a little bit before this time last year. NFL player burns an American flag in locker room. That's a few years back. Man to serve life sentence for stealing $159 jacket. Oakland University using hockey pucks to protect against active shooters. And then these two are actually different ideas that have been floated around on Twitter most recently. This idea that a sitting president who's impeached by House but not convicted by the Senate has his or her first term nullified, thus allowing them to run for 2 more terms. And so this one did make its way out onto Twitter by some different political pundits. And then also a sitting president who's impeached is barred from seeking a second term. So what can we find out about that?
The last one's false.
So how did you fact check it?
Snopes.
Just Snopes said it's false.
That's one of the problems I ran into
Yep.
teaching this, is everything is debunked. So trying to find something that's hot and real that they have to think critically about
Nice.
without automatically going to Snopes, I found that challenging. Finding examples that weren't already done for you.
Yeah, one that's maybe in the middle a little bit where some people think it's true, some people think it's false.
Well, or just that it's so hot off the press that
Mhm.
Snopes hasn't dug into it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Something that they can,
Dig into
Yeah.
a little bit
Yeah.
more. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, you have to be right on top of it. So as soon as you see that tweet coming off, you have to like, and usually it's debunked within the next
Yeah.
hour.
yep,
Yeah, I think that's one thing about the internet. It's a lot of, in my high school journalism classes, mistakes can happen or something gets up there, but the internet quickly lets you know if something's wrong or fixed or whatnot.
Well, I know the problem that I've run into a couple times is like when a story is partially true or half true, and you know, is that kids will want to use that as their argument, and they're not giving the full side. They're only presenting their side that supports, which is card stacking, so that you know it's part of a way to do it. But
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little. Like conspiracy theories are ripe with that. Of just this could possibly be true. You know, like Bigfoot. It's like you can't prove it's not, but
Or vaping,
Yeah.
you know, like that the science around it is so not super concrete, or there's not a lot of research around it, you know, and so like it's just hard sometimes
guess-
to.
they finally, I think, came out with the first one that did link vaping to cancer just recently. But yeah, a lot of it's still fresh.
So what have we found out? Like first one, true, false?
False.
False. Second,
false.
false. That was another manipulated image issue there. Third one?
True. Sort of.
Yes, true. Actually, I mean, it was presented in a kind of false context way. It was on the Democracy Now!, I believe, website or in one of their web videos that they put out, and they're talking about Amber Geier, and how Amber Geier was serving 10 years only for murdering John, his last name, what's his first name, I can't remember. Anyway, in his home, she was an off-duty police officer, as we know, and this man, who is a man of color, was sentenced to life for stealing this $160 jacket. The part that they didn't refer back to is that he was a repeat offender, and so it was kind of more about like the mandatory minimum type of laws that were in some different states. And so that was kind of the backstory or the half story that was presented to them that you need to dig deeper into. This Oakland University and the hockey bucks.
True.
Yeah, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And so now with your textbooks, you're being armed with a hockey puck in this university to aid in your ALICE training. And so the last two, nullified and then free to run for 2 more terms if they come up as being not guilty. Yep. And then sitting president who's impeached is barred from seeking a second term. Yeah. And that one is interesting if you continue to dig into the article, read into it, is that we're kind of into almost, it hasn't been tested in a presidential sitting or situation here. And so like this person could possibly run for a lower office and not be barred from running again for a lower office. All right, so other tools to practice sniffing out suspicious news or things that you might take a look at with your students. Factitious is an interesting little online quiz that just kind of has some of the more hot, off the presses type of fake news stories that are out there. Kids can work through it and kind of see what they know about that fake news. For the sake of time, we'll skip through this one. And then also there is a fact versus opinion piece from the Pew Research Center that just allows your students to go in, read headlines, and determine whether or not it's a fact or opinion type of a headline or opinion type of a piece.
Is that one would that be appropriate for elementary?
This one for elementary, it depends on the grade level. I would say maybe like into 6th grade, possibly. I would say it's definitely geared a lot more for your middle schools and high school type of students.
All right, so we'll go to part 2, and kind of one thing that I thought was interesting that I've learned in the last couple years, the Pew Research, or Gallup and Knight actually did a study on trust in the media with a lot of the money that's been devoted to this. They're actually saying our own biases affect how we read the news as much as the bias of the publication. And we all are seeing a lot more bias in all of our publications, and there's definitely a lot of emotion around it, for sure. Hit the next one. So this is a quote from their study. To a large degree, bias and accuracy appear to be in the eye of the beholder, greatly influenced by whether one agrees with the ideological leaning of the news source. So I think when you're teaching bias too, it's important, we'll get into looking at bias in publications, but it's also important to recognize our own bias. Like, I'm an Iowa Hawkeye fan. We're all delusional that we think we're gonna win 12 games and get really mad when we lose a couple games. But Vegas had us at 8 wins in the year. We need to be a little more realistic with what we're expecting. But don't tell that to anyone in Iowa City right now. And it doesn't necessarily all have to be super serious and political. We can definitely look at biases in sports teams or your school versus someone else and how that might affect your view of reality and what's going on. On the political side, there was a lawyer in Colorado that came up with this one rating on the left. It's not perfect. There is some science in it. But what I find interesting is the red box. And you can find this on allsides.com along with their bias rating of every publication in the world. And the red box is basically things that are made inaccurately and with real ill intent or harmful intent. And that is the serious, kind of dangerous, racist, and other things like that stuff that's being put out on the internet. And that's what Facebook and Google and other people and the government are fighting about, who's going to take this stuff down, should they take it down. And they are starting to take down those sites because they're so good at making the fake news, and they're just, you know, really awful things in our internet world. And as a freedom of speech journalism teacher, it is a little, we had always taught before, you know, 5 years ago, we have to let the Nazis say what they say, and then we as a society will like debunk them. And now, because of the internet, that's something that's changed. We're basically saying, and Deborah Boyd in her big speeches is that they're just too good at making the, you know, misinformation online, and that we are going to have to not just allow everything on the internet. So that's kind of an interesting social studies philosophical question change that's happening. But I highly recommend allsides.com. They have bias ratings on everything, and there's these charts. And if you want to get into, you know, one that's been banned from the internet with lots of controversy is the InfoWars stuff, would be an example you could teach on that.
So my perspective on this is that, like, you can put these things in front of kids and they still carry the bias that they have with them, and a lot of times they'll look at like the news that their parents watch, or they'll look at like what their favorite news source is, and they'll see where it is on that chart and they will freak out. Like, I've had kids that were like, oh my gosh, no, this is not right, this is not true, this is, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And so I shy away from doing that as my first step, and really focus a lot more on helping them build their bias filter and their fairness filter, and trying to understand what's coming in at them, what they're consuming, and how to think a little bit critically about it. And then maybe working through some of the articles from some of their favorite news publications and have them apply their new skills to that. And so I linked off of this slide, there is a link to a lesson that Museum put together about the fairness filter. Basically it says we're looking at these three things in text. We're looking for word choice, context, and counterpoints. And so we just scan those articles for those things and rate them high on like whether they're using leading language or things like that. That's emotive language to get you fired up. Or if they're using neutral language. Context, so are they painting a broad picture of the entire story, or are we getting like a really, really small piece of the pie? So in that example that I shared with the $160 jacket, the guy serving time, that didn't give us a broad context of what was happening, the piece that I was referencing back to. And then counterpoints, are they providing the opposite side of the story or another side of the story in addition to what they've provided as maybe their key frame for this? And so we're not going to take a look at that fairness video. It's very good, and I would definitely suggest taking a look at this with your students. And this lesson is very good too. I'm going to run you through it very quickly. I'm not going to have you do everything because we are a little short on time. But no, don't click on it. Just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so my biggest beef about this, or not beef necessarily, but the thing that I believe very strongly about this is that you have to explicitly teach kids how to dissect text and how to dissect media, okay? You can't just say, here's an activity, go forth and be fruitful and you'll be an awesome, like, truth seeker. That's not gonna happen. And so you have to use like guided instruction, like the gradual release of responsibility. So starting with focused instruction, guided instruction, collaborative learning, independent learning. And so this is what the model is going to look like that we're going to just look through right now. And so,
just tell me to
flip. So the way that we did this with the high school that I was working at was that we did a bias lesson. We had them look at a text that no one was going to get too super fired up about. It was reporting on Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I definitely think that this lesson for sure would transcend all grade levels, whether they're old, like the kiddos that I was working with that were 9th grade, 10th grade kiddos, or younger kiddos. Everyone can grab onto this one. And so this is the I do, we do part of the lesson. And so we provide the kids with, just go ahead and flip, a little background information on the story in case they've forgotten what happened in Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And so you give them quick little background information. And then next, you show them some different headlines. And so for the I do portion, I'm going to go through and I'm going to say, okay, let's take a look at this first headline here together. And so I'm going to highlight here, as I'm reading this, I see that the author is using the word spoil, and I also see that the author used the word trash. And that's really, for me, creating some emotional language and making me think poorly of Goldilocks. And so I'm thinking that this isn't very fair, just based upon that. And so I explicitly model my thinking as I'm going through this, and I do the marking up of the text, and then have them go through and mark it up together, or we do that together as a process. And so what other things are you guys seeing here in like line 2, vulnerable child found asleep in unsecured home? If we're thinking a little bit about that word choice, context, and then also counterpoint.
Vulnerable.
Yeah, vulnerable. Again, that emotional language that makes you feel pity for that child. Anything else that you're seeing there?
Unsecured.
Yeah, unsecured house provides us some context, but it's definitely kind of a leading context too. Like, oh, it was kind of your fault, you didn't lock your house. And so we go through this process together, just as a group, thinking about where that language is leading, where that language, or where we're not seeing enough context, or where we're seeing very small piece of context, or where we're seeing no counterpoints. Did anyone see anything with a counterpoint at all?
Who found her asleep, and did they also go into the unsecured home to find her?
Who found her asleep, and did they also go into the, oh, well, and I'm looking for the counterpoint, yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah. Number 4 might be kind of a counterpoint. Like if we think of that story, a lot of times we think of it more from Goldilocks' perspective. And so like the Bear family perspective is kind of the counterpoint. But yeah, who did go find her there in that home? All right, so that's kind of what we do is the I do, we do together part. And then next, you do it together. So this is the collaborative learning part. Take an article out of all sides, have students work in groups looking at one article that's like from the right, one that's from the center, and one that's from the left. And do that together where they're looking for that leading language, the context, and the counterpoint. I had them mark up using Read and Write for Google because this particular class or school had Read and Write for Google, and so they just did that online. And then they brought together all their markings to the table, and we had some conversations about that. And then there's also some, I kind of outlined the procedure, and then some different discussion questions that I asked them as we were working through that, so something if you wanted to take that back to your class. But then finally, the you do alone part of it is what John has here with the media.
So I just did this in my last media literacy unit with 9th graders, and it went pretty well. This was a challenge. The contest is well over from a couple of years ago from the New York Times, where basically they did a study and also challenged teenagers to look at how they get news from different sites over a 24 to 48 hour period, and then evaluate them for bias and actually what they thought, and then make a 1 minute little video about what they found out. Let's see if we can play. We only have 4 minutes, so I'm gonna have to speed up. So I'm not gonna play the video, but the video is there. This is the assignment on it. They go through, they do it. When I teach variety of sources, these are news aggregators. A lot of students think that Google News is a producer of journalism or Flipboard is a producer of journalism. They're not. They aggregate sites, which I'm sure you guys all know, but teaching them how to process getting the news is really important for me. Most of the students I've talked to have never been taught how to get news on their phones or computers by anyone when they're in high school. So elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, prove me wrong when I go into the next high school and I say, how many of you kids have been taught how to get news on your phones? And they all say, nobody's taught me this. So I know you guys won't let that happen. But I'm a big fan of Flipboard and Twitter lists and TweetDeck. The big thing is make choices, have them know how to get the news. There's Twitter lists. TweetDeck, if you've never used it, is great. Here's the video, which I'm not going to show.
So like if we were going to modify, because I know a lot of you who are teaching elementary might be thinking, yeah, that's great, but like my kids are under 13, so how the heck are they going to, aggregate news sources? What might be some ways that we could have them think a little bit about aggregating in a way that would be safe?
We just have them start looking at websites, like how do you analyze the website, who's writing it, so just starting to question that everything that you see isn't true on there.
Yeah.
Research, because that's kind of our focus, not necessarily news.
Yeah, so like analyzing websites, maybe using your Northern Pacific Tree Octopus website. I know that's a great one that our elementary teachers or even our middle school teachers use a lot of times to get kids engaged in that discussion. I think that you could even almost modify these lists and make them collaborative on like a Google slide deck or something. So we open up a Google slide deck, everyone put on here one source that you found, why you thought it was a good source, and get ready to share it with your classmates, okay? And so then by the time we're done with this, we've got some news sources or some different pieces from every kiddo in the class that we can refer back to. And so thinking a little bit outside of the box of like, I've got kids that are 11, they can't go online and make Twitter lists. What are we gonna do as a alternative? Deb?
Another thought is a custom Google search where you pre-populate sources, and so they're...
You can do that on Flipboard too.
Oh,
Make a magazine of pre-made sources,
And so you're going to constrain what they're searching, just to kind of limit that a bit.
Yeah, and we skipped through some stuff, we're out of time. I know you guys want to go eat lunch. If you've never been to the museum lessons, they're awesome. They have free posters. Even though sadly the museum is not going to exist anymore in physical building, all the lessons still should be online. I love if there's one thing I'd say is my go-to lesson for media literacy, this is it. It's a great share-worthy activity, and they can go through, and I think it's so important. The spread of fake news is on us. And just teaching them how, whether they should or should not share something is, so important for all these kids. I know my 6th grader has a cell phone and is already going down that road. But yeah, to leave you with one thing, that would be my one thing.
And we did link off of the slide deck to the museum resources that we referenced. The Goldilocks and the Three Bears is a museum activity, and it's linked right off of there. There's also a great other additional lesson on bias as well that's linked off of the slide deck. I would highly recommend setting up that museum account. To access all of their stuff, you do have to have an account. The few things that I shared with you, I think that they are open to you for 999 days, it sounds like, or something. They have this like restricted link thing for sharing, but it doesn't cost you anything to set up an account. You have access to a ton of resources, and there's lots of great media literacy lessons that are in there.
And I went into a 4th grade class, and you can do, here's a nice little news writing lesson. You can teach them how to actually be reporters and interview somebody and publish something. And if you've never gone on the Spark pages, I believe they are FERPA compliant and everything now too. So that's a great way to actually have them be a journalist. I know, like, my journalism students in high school have been like super proud to be a journalist and all this like debate and everything that's going on. And if you're in advanced classes, social studies, everything like that, I mentioned Dana Boyd and Dr. Kate Starbird have written some very complex academic pieces on what's going on in the media literacy world on the other end that are great resources as well. Will teaching media literacy solve all these problems? No, but it's better than doing nothing. And like, I so believe in teaching kids to be critical thinkers and truth seekers, and I hope you guys all go out and add a little bit something into something you're already doing, or throw in a share-worthy worksheet. And I know if you ever have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me on social media or whatnot. Gina, do you have anything else?
No, it's Pie Day. We should get, there's pie being served for like day 2 of iTech. It's always Pie Day.
Pie Day! Thank you guys so much for
Thank
coming.
you.